All right, get this. We're diving into AI and empathy today.
Really interesting combination, right?
You wouldn't think they go together.
Not at first glance, no.
But a researcher in Italy, a Dr. Fabio Di Bello, is working on this mathematical model, and get this, to actually represent human empathy,
Yeah.
like translating feelings into the language of computers,
Yeah.
ones and zeros.
It's amazing work, really, because it gets at, like, the core of what makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you realize that most people, they don't get how complex empathy actually is.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Di Bello, he really emphasizes that it's not just about emotions.
So it's more than just feeling what someone else is feeling.
Yeah, exactly. There's this, like, whole other side to it, this cognitive dimension.
Cognitive empathy. So that's like the thinking part of empathy.
Exact.
So like, how does that work?
So imagine a friend is upset. Maybe they missed a deadline at work.
Okay.
Cognitive empathy is kind of like you stepping into their shoes mentally, you know, considering their workload, maybe their past experiences with this kind of thing, even just their personality. It's not about you feeling their stress directly,
Right.
but it's you getting why they feel that way.
Understand the thought process behind those emotions.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But then how do you even begin to build that into like a mathematical model?
Yeah, so at the core of Dr. Di Bello's model is this function.
Okay.
It's written as E, open parenthesis, X, comma, Y, close parenthesis.
The XY.
Right. But before you think this is going to be some, like, calculus lesson or something.
My math skills are a little rusty, I'll be honest.
Don't worry about it. Just think of it this way. The X in the equation represents your emotional state,
Okay.
and the Y represents the emotional state of the person that you're with.
Gotcha.
And the function combines both the cognitive and the affective empathy, each with a specific emphasis or weight, and then ultimately that generates a measurement of empathy.
Okay. So I think I'm following so far.
Good.
But how in the world do you measure something like cognitive similarity mathematically? Thoughts and beliefs aren't exactly something you can, like, weigh in a scale, right?
That's where it gets really interesting. Di Bello's model represents thoughts as vectors.
Vectors, like in physics class.
Yeah, kinda, similar idea. But instead of physical forces, each dimension in the space represents a different characteristic, like your beliefs, your experiences, your goals, your background, essentially, your whole mental landscape.
So you're mapping my entire mental landscape onto this graph.
Exactly.
And then doing the same for the person I'm interacting with.
Precisely. And then to determine cognitive similarity, the model uses something called cosine similarity to calculate how closely those mental landscapes, you know, align.
Okay, I vaguely remember cosine from high school, but refresh my memory. What does that tell us about empathy?
Okay. Well, think of it like this. The closer the cosine value is to 1,
Okay.
the more aligned your thoughts and beliefs are with the other person's.
Mhm.
So a value of 1 would mean your perspectives are, like, totally aligned.
So like complete cognitive similarity.
Exactly.
So if I'm talking to someone who's equally passionate about, say, I don't know, sustainable living,
Uh-huh.
our cognitive vectors on this empathy graph would be pretty close together.
That's right. And that closeness, that high cosine similarity, you know, that suggests a strong cognitive connection, which feeds into the overall empathy measurement.
That's incredible. You're saying we could quantify how much someone gets me, like mentally speaking, just from the way our thoughts align. Okay, now my mind is officially blown, but we've only talked about the thinking part so far.
Right.
What about the actual feeling part of empathy? How do you measure that?
That's where we move from what we call the cognitive space to the emotional space.
Okay, so we're back, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around how this model maps something as human as empathy, you know, mathematically.
Yeah.
And before we went down that whole cosine similarity rabbit hole,
Right.
we were about to dive into the feeling part,
Right. The affective side.
the feeling part of empathy.
Right.
So how do we go from, like, mapping thoughts to mapping actual emotions?
Okay. So imagine another graph,
Go.
but instead of mapping, like, belief and experiences,
Right.
we're plotting emotions.
Yeah.
Joy, sadness, anger, fear.
The whole spectrum.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, so my current emotional state, it gets a point on this graph.
Yeah.
And so does the person I'm interacting with.
Exactly.
Then what?
The model looks at how close those points are.
Yeah.
The closer they are, the stronger the effective empathy.
Interesting. So if I'm feeling, like, joyful and someone tells me some amazing news, our points on this graph would be practically on top of each other.
Exactly. You're on the same wavelength emotionally, which kind of strengthens that feeling of connection, that understanding.
This is so cool. But hold on a second. Empathy isn't like one size fits all, right?
Right.
I mean, I react differently to my best friend than I do to, like, a stranger on the street.
You're totally right. Empathy changes depending on the situation, and the model actually accounts for that.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
Remember those weight factors we talked about?
The ones that determine the balance
Yeah.
between cognitive and affective empathy? Like
Exactly.
adjusting the knobs for thinking versus feeling.
Right. The model actually adjusts those weights dynamically depending on your relationship with the other person,
Mm.
the situation, and even the emotions that are involved.
Okay, so give me an example. How would the model handle, like, a close friend sharing good news versus someone I barely know sharing good news?
Okay, let's say a close friend shares some amazing news. Because of that bond you have, the model would probably amplify the weight given to effective empathy.
Okay.
So you're more emotionally invested in their experience, so your reaction is going to be more emotionally driven.
You're picking up on their emotions more intensely because you care more.
Yes, exactly. But now, imagine a colleague, someone you barely know, shares similar good news. The model might actually place more emphasis on the cognitive empathy in that scenario.
Interesting.
It's not that you don't care, it's just the relationship calls for like a different balance.
So instead of mirroring their excitement,
Hmm.
the model recognizes, I would probably focus more on understanding their perspective, which is still a form of empathy. It's just approached differently.
Exactly. And it gets even more nuanced than that. Like, consider the impact of the actual situation.
So we're back, and I'm still thinking about how this model can actually fine-tune empathy based on, like, who we're with and what's going on around us. It's crazy.
It is pretty remarkable. I mean, we're talking about like mapping out one of the most human things about us.
Yeah. It feels almost like science fiction, but it's not. This is real research.
I know. It really pushes the
Yeah.
boundaries and it makes you think about the possibilities.
Now,
Yeah.
what we can actually do with it.
Yeah.
Because it's cool that we can try to map out empathy, but, like, how does that actually help someone?
That's the big question, right? But the applications are like massive, especially when you think about AI. Imagine virtual assistants, chatbots that can like actually respond to how you feel.
No more robots reading from a script.
Right. Instead of those canned responses, AI could offer support solutions that actually fit with how you're feeling in that moment.
Wow. That would change everything, especially for people who really rely on technology to communicate.
Yeah.
What else? What else could we do with this?
Okay, so think about healthcare. We could have these social robots designed to interact with patients on a whole other level, with compassion, providing support, companionship, beyond just like the practical stuff.
Right, like
Yeah.
especially for maybe elderly people who might be lonely, might not have as much contact. It's not about replacing people, but it's like
Well,
adding to it.
exactly. And that's not all. We could use this in telemedicine. Doctors could get a better sense of how their patients are doing emotionally, even through a screen. Or even education. Imagine AI that can adapt to how a student's feeling to help them learn better.
It's like we always think about AI being super advanced, but this is like next level. It can actually understand us.
It's exciting, for sure, but it also makes you think, what does this mean about us? About being human?
Yeah, if we can teach AI to understand and respond to our emotions, where does that leave us?
It's a tough question. One we'll probably be thinking about for a long time. But by doing this research, we're starting to hopefully get a better grasp on technology and what it means for humans.
Well said. It's definitely given me a lot to think about. Dr. Di Bello's work is amazing, and what we could do with it is just incredible. It's definitely an exciting time to be thinking about AI and empathy.
I completely agree. We're just at the beginning, and who knows what the future holds.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive sparked your curiosity. AI and empathy, it's a lot to think about. Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking those big questions.